Hello, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started now. My name is Heather Froom, and I oversee the Research and Education Training Department at Equiture. We would like to thank you for joining us today for the webinar Countdown to Chaos. I'm going to get a couple of quick housekeeping things out of the way. So, if you don't know yet, we have been doing a podcast called Viewpoints with an S, and you can check that out on anywhere you find your podcasts. We have a variety of guests from the industry and discuss a variety of industry related topics. I will put the link to subscribe in the chat section shortly. If you have any questions or comments during the presentation, we ask that you type out your questions in the Q&A section on the toolbar, and Lillian will answer the questions at the end of the presentation. And now I have for you Chief Lillian Bonsignor.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm very excited to be here with you all. I'm just going to take a few minutes to introduce myself, and then we'll get right into our topic today, Countdown to Chaos. So my name is Lillian Bonsignor. I am the former Chief of EMS Operations for FDNY in New York City. My responsibility was basically to lead all of the EMS bureau for the FDNY, and that took care of the 5 boroughs of New York City. Our system handled about 1.5 million assignments a year, so it's quite a busy place to work. I just spent 31 years with the city in the fire department, and I retired at the end of last year. I also had the privilege of spending some time in our training academy as the chief of EMS training for several years. So I've had a lot of experience when it comes to working in a large system. By the time I was promoted to the chief of EMS, the Bureau of EMS Operations, I was the first female to ever get 4 stars in the FDNY's history of over 150 years. So that was pretty exciting. Certainly when I took that job, and that was in 2019 that I got promoted, I did not know that very shortly after that, New York City would become the epicenter for a worldwide pandemic. So they left that part out. That became my responsibility as well. As you all know, it hit New York City pretty hard. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today because, the call volume had reached levels that we had never seen before. And I think that just folds into a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here. So just a couple other things. I would love it if you would put some questions in the chat. And if you don't have any questions, if you can just drop maybe a key takeaway from our talk today in the chat, that would be great. So everybody else can see maybe some of the key points. I'm not claiming to be here to teach you anything. I'm here primarily to share my experience with you and hope that it sparks your own thoughts about things, and we can, as colleagues, discuss some of the more important aspects of our job. I will tell you that our Bureau of Communications, and I will refer to New York a lot just because this is the basis of my experience, but our Bureau of Communications was a very big one. Like I said, 1.5 million jobs a year. And these people were absolutely incredible. We had the privilege, at least on the EMS side, of having our dispatchers and call takers also be EMTs or paramedics, mostly EMTs, which I think, it helped us in such a big system because there was a different level of understanding of emergency medicine that was helpful. I will tell you that my perspective, and I know there is a lot of talk about this throughout the nation, but my perspective is the EMS call takers and dispatchers, or emergency call takers and dispatchers, it doesn't necessarily need to only be EMS, are indeed first responders. I know that there's always these conversations about whether the folks that do this job is should be considered first responders, and there is no doubt in my mind that you should be considered first responders if you're working as an EMS call taker, emergency call taker, or a dispatcher. When I was running a training academy, we would always say that training was the heartbeat of the system. In our system in New York City, we ran about 1,200 shifts in the EMS side per day. And that included our partners in the hospital. So the FDNY in the system represents 2/3 of the emergency response, and our hospital partners represent 1/3 of the emergency response, but the FDNY supervises that 1/3 when it comes to field duties. So together, and you really need to be together in a city so large, it was over 1,200 shifts, ambulances per 24 hours. And there was a lot of tragedy that had come out of New York. So it required that everybody get involved, everybody be a part of this. So for us at the FDNY, when I was running the training academy, the EMS Bureau alone in the FDNY has over 4,000 EMTs and paramedics, and they all have to stay certified. So the EMS Academy for New York manages over 13,000 certifications, per year, and that includes the CFRs, which are our firefighters, and they're at any one time 9 or 10,000, even 11,000 of those folks who are trained to the lower level of emergency medicine. So training was undoubtedly the heartbeat of the system. You could not go into the field, you could not operate in any of these circumstances unless you were certified and trained to do so. So, the training academy was able to put new people in the field. We ran our probationary school plus our recertifications. But as I would say that the training academy was our heartbeat of the system, I would also say that communications was the brain of our system. The heart is great, but it can't do much without the brain. The brain of the system was always our call takers and our dispatchers, because 1,200 tours in one city, 1,200 ambulances in a 24-hour period would basically be useless if we had no way to get them where they needed to go. So I put a very high esteem on the folks that worked as a call taker or a dispatcher. Very, very difficult job, but very, very necessary. And having been part of a lot of big events, and we'll talk about some of those things today, I can tell you that I relied very heavily on the dispatchers, not only as a first responder, but also as the leadership. It was the information that I needed from them that helped me make reasonable decisions on the operational level. So, we're going to go into this presentation, I guess, with you understanding that when I talk about EMS call takers and dispatchers, I'm talking about you as though you are just as important or more important than the first responders in the field. I mean, honestly, we could not do this job if we weren't all doing this job. So, we'll move on from there. So today we're going to talk about a countdown to chaos. And I chose this name because it really is a countdown. Like, for anybody who does an emergency service job, whether it be EMS related, dispatch related, law enforcement, fire, any of those things, you understand very clearly that we can go from a moment of nothing going on, where you're talking about, your family trip over the weekend, to all hell breaking loose in a drop of a dime. And that's what we signed up for. We signed up to be ready at all times for the worst of the worst. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, which is really the role of the call taker and dispatcher in those type of assignments. So our agenda for today, we're going to talk about preparing, responding, and thriving in high stress environments, which is what we all live in basically if we're working in any of these areas. We're going to touch a little bit on the role of technology. And for those of you who actually do this dispatch job or call taking job, if you're aware of any new technology coming out that I haven't talked about, please put that in a chat because I think it's very helpful for others to see what might be coming their way. And then we're going to talk a little bit about managing chaos and stress. And, stress is a big part of emergency services, first responder jobs. Stress is, we basically made our careers out of other people's tragedies. So it is nearly impossible to avoid stress. And certainly when the large events come, it is a quick inoculation of stress. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the ways that we can get around those things. So preparing for and responding to and thriving in high stress environments. Let's talk about preparation first, because preparation is the key to our success. This here, you could see this this little clip here. This is when the plane went down in the Hudson River. Here's something you never see in your lifetime, and certainly I didn't think I would see in my lifetime. To show up and find a passenger commercial plane floating in a river with people standing out there on the wings, like really quite amazing. Can you imagine what the call volume did on that day? Could you imagine if you're just sitting at your terminal or you're at your job, or maybe you're lucky and you're home that day, but can you imagine what it might have been to have a city the size of New York see an airplane start to come out of the sky and head for the river? Now remember that, in 2001, we've experienced issues with planes before, right? We had the World Trade Center attacks. And so any time that we're dealing with a plane coming out of the sky, all of New York City has flashbacks. So, this was a very different situation. This was a pilot who was extremely skilled, who was able to land his failing plane in the middle of the Hudson River and avoid hitting any buildings, neighborhoods, killing people. And the folks that were in that plane survived, and they're out there standing on the wings. So how do we start to prepare for some of these large scale events? Because it's not easy to predict the type of stuff that we're going to see, right? Like every time you think you've seen it all, something crazy happens and you're like, oh, never saw that one coming. So some of the challenges that we know in large scale events include, the sudden surge of call volume. The call volume can go up very, very fast in all types of natural disasters, not just planes landing or planes crashing, but any kind of mass casualty incident. And that includes weather emergencies, hurricanes, earthquakes, shootings, mass shootings. Unfortunately, we had another mass shooting in Maine last night. And this is something that happens over and over. I believe this was, more than 600 events this year already of mass shootings. So like any of these type of large events that create lots of patients can pose very unique challenges. They can overwhelm the emergency services due to a sudden surge in call volume. And that can happen not only in the communications bureau, but also in the field. So a shortage of resources, a difficulty in coordinating the response effort, all of that happens as a matter of a large event. And it happens in a matter of a moment. So how do we start to think about, how do we get in front of these things? We know that according to FEMA, disasters can increase call volume by 600%. Are you ready for that? are you ready for that? Because it could happen anywhere. It doesn't need to just be New York City. It could be in your hometown. It could be anywhere that there are people. We know that resource shortages exist on a daily basis, and that is without a large scale event. So what happens when something just um, creates this overwhelming need for resources, and where do you get them from? Where do you get the dispatchers? Where do you get the field personnel? Where do you get the transport ambulances, nurses, things like that? And how long is this event going to be? Some events happen all of a sudden. For example, in New York City, when we had the World Trade Center attacks, I was a rescuer there as a first responder, and that was an event that happened. It was tragic and terrible. Lots and lots of people died, including 343 members of the fire department that I was working for on that day. But it was isolated to that particular event. Now, it wasn't going to continue to happen. So we knew that this happened. The buildings fell. It was the most tragic things we had ever seen in our lives. And we knew what our job was. Our job was to recover as many people as we can and identify them and, start to recover as a city and as a country, to be quite honest. I would even argue the world. But we knew that that event had happened in that place and stayed in that place. Whereas the pandemic kept going. It started to show its head in early March of 2020 for us. By the end of March of 2020, we had hit the highest call volume we'd ever seen. We went from having 4,000 or so calls per day to having almost 6,500. I think our top was 6,427 assignments in one day. We had hundreds of jobs on our screens, and they were holding because we didn't have resources to send to them. And this happened over the course of a very short period of time. Once we had hit our peak call volume, we had no idea how long this pandemic was going to last. It just kept going. It kept going and going and going. And then, it started to stabilize, and then we would get what we referred to as waves. And it's basically 3 years that we continue to fight that fight, although the bulk of our introduction was the most serious, and that was in March and April and May of 2020. But how can you tell how long an operation is going to be extended? How do you prepare the first responders? How do you prepare the call takers and the dispatchers to handle an assignment that goes on and on and on, and still be able to handle all the other 911 calls that are coming in, the regular calls that never stop, the people who are in car accidents and having babies and, stabbings or shootings or, trauma or, heart attacks or, all the regular stuff doesn't stop when we have a big assignment. So as a dispatcher, as a call taker, that stress that is placed on your shoulders is immense, and it could last for a long time. So when we talk about preparation, what are you doing to try to prepare yourself for these events? What are you doing to prepare yourself so that you can have a plan and put a plan in action when necessary? And believe me, that plan may not be the prettiest thing in the world, and it may not solve all your problems, but it will be better than not having a plan at all. So some of the things that you have to do when you're pre-planning and you're getting yourself ready is conduct massive risk assessments. You see this video? This video is from a job called the Twin Parks fire. This was in the Bronx. Unfortunately, we pulled out more than 60 patients 30 plus or so were critical. 17 people died in this fire. It was very tragic and very fast. The patients were coming out very fast. So, where we had the luxury of having an enormous amount of resources in New York, would you have the same situation? How would you handle if you had a massive fire that produced 60 plus patients, half of which were critical, and people, were dying, or dead at the scene? How do you manage that entire thing? And how do you manage that from a dispatch perspective? Is this something that would be identified as a potential hazard in your agency? Are you prepared to handle that? I'll tell you, I was the chief of EMS operations on this particular job, and I was almost blinded by the amount of patients coming out. I needed so badly for our dispatchers to get a higher view of the situation and let me know which hospitals could take which type of patients, how many patients had actually gone to each area hospital, and coordinate our resources. It was so very difficult to do that from the scene. I needed somebody who could take a downward view and really make the phone calls, get the information, and feed me the information so that I could make reasonable decisions based on where people were going to go, what kind of treatment they were going to get. I could barely handle the amount of folks coming out, never mind try to figure out who can take who in the 5 or 6 or 7 surrounding hospitals. And again, in New York City, we have a luxury of having a hospital within minutes, no matter where we are. That's not the case all around the country. Sometimes your hospitals are an hour away, sometimes even more. We don't use air medical very often because of the buildings, and we have hospitals at our service. So, without that dispatcher being ready to handle this or help me, I would not be able to make reasonable decisions. So how do we start to manage that? How do you as a person, how does your agency start to prepare yourself for things like that? You know that there's going to be multiple agencies that are involved in such a large assignment. So you're going to have to coordinate resources. You're going to have to make sure that everybody has the information that they need. And you're going to have multiple and multiple calls coming in through the 911 system for the same assignment. So what are you doing on your end? It's important that you set up drills, and whether internal and external, not only within your own bureau, but also how you interact with the other agencies that are going to be part of this particular job, right? Or any big job. So, my suggestion would always be, if you haven't already started to look at your potential hazards and say, how would we handle this? If this automatically doubled right now, what would be our game plan as dispatchers, as call takers? How would we surge? How would we manage? Would we need to put teams together to handle this event while everybody else handles other events? Or can we just go about our business the way we're set up now? How do we get people in? Are you prepared to call people in? Do you have a list of people who are prepared to respond in if you need to increase your capabilities in a very short period of time? And you should drill on those as best as you can so that you have played this part before and you have something to fall back on when these events actually happen. Again, may not be the complete picture, but it's certainly better than not having a plan at all. At least you'll understand where your weaknesses are and what you can do to strengthen those things. Look at your current policies, review your policies, update your outdated policies and procedures. And as much as we want to believe that everybody's policies are updated, I could tell you that is just not true. everybody's policies need to be reviewed on a regular basis because things change, resources change, capabilities change, availability changes, partnerships change. You need to make sure that there is a strategy in place to review your policies, annually, at least annually, and update those. And updated policies mean nothing if they're not reviewed with the people who have to institute and abide by these policies. So it's not only important to review your policies and update your policies, but it's also important to share your policies. Share your policies with the people internally who have to exercise these policies, and share your policies with the external partners who have to be a part of the team when it comes to large events. You may learn some stuff that you really didn't know when you start to invite other people into the conversation. Remember that as emergency first responders, it is not about us at all. It is all about the patients and the lives that we save. Our job is to save as many lives as we can in a big scale event. And that doesn't matter whether you're standing there with a stretcher, doing CPR, starting an IV, answering a call, or dispatching units. Everybody's job is important when it comes to this. So look at your updated policies. You'll be surprised how outdated some of these things are. And update them regularly, review them, drill on them. Create large scale incident pre-plans. Look at the areas that you serve and try to predict where the worst possible things can happen. So, is it a big school? Is it an airport? Is it a terminal? Is it a marine terminal? What do you have? Is it a chemical plant? Is it, is it a religious institution? What will you do if something happens in those areas? Are you familiar with the area? Are you familiar with the challenges that exist because of these particular areas? Are there doors that you can't go through? Is there information that you're going to be able to give those folks that are in the field and trying to save as many lives as possible? So, create the large scale incident plans with your approach so that you have something to pull out and you can at least let that guide you through this tragic event. Conduct a scheduled policy review. Like I said, once you've reviewed this annually, bring everybody in, get everybody's, attention so that if something is not working or you have to add or subtract anything, you have the opportunity to do that. Believe me, it is not the time to try to pull something out while a large scale event is happening. There is no time. That happens without your knowledge, the drop of a dime, and now it's time to go to work. So as long as it's not happening at the moment, you should either be reviewing a policy or drilling on that policy, making sure that people understand that on an event like this, our job is to do our job and to do our job as best as we can because people's lives are literally in our hands. So, we have to do the most that we can with the least that we have, right? So make sure that you're preparing yourself as best you can while you can. Coordination of resources is a very difficult situation, especially if you haven't done it already. If you know who your partners are, it's a little bit easier because you would be able to go to maybe a checklist or something like that. But it's important to identify available resources for big events. Not only your internal resources, which are very, very important because you cannot run this assignment unless you have people. And people have to understand when we have a large scale event, the regular work hours generally go out the window. It's an all hands situation where everybody has to be involved for as long as you need to be involved. And you have to figure out how to maybe rotate folks so they can rest and, you get a fresh set of ears, a fresh set of eyes on that terminal or in that game. Know who your external resources are, but more importantly, who your contacts for your external resources are. We need to know how to activate external resources, and we need to know how to activate mutual aid. Mutual aid are the folks that, are in the dugout. They're waiting. They're here to help you, but they're not going to be in the game unless you call them. They're your partners basically. So know how to activate them, and talk about within your agency when the right time is to actually activate them. Because some of them have some time constraints on you. Like you'll have a mutual aid agreement that may only give you 3 days of surge or maybe 5 days of assistance. So, talk about those plans are. Develop a plan for coordination. Explore a need for predetermined teams, especially when it comes to large scale events that are extended, or if you happen to be in the dispatch call taking realm, how do you now separate the event from all the normal regular calls that happen every day? So do you have a crisis team? Do you have a large scale emergency team? Who's going to be on that team? How many call takers? How many dispatchers? What are the hours? How do you rotate? Who are the supervisors? All those things are important to have a plan for in advance of a large scale event. Plan for multi-agency communication. Have regular meetings. I would say, probably, at least twice a year, you should pull all your agencies together, whether it be in I don't know, bagel shop or on a Zoom call. Make sure that you see face to face who the players are so that you know how to get them if something happens last minute. Understand the incident command system and how to implement it. And that's where everybody has a role. Every agency has a role. Everybody within an agency has a role. There is a structure to how we set up the response, and you should know what your role is or what your agency role is during that particular event, whatever that event is. This is New York City. Why is New York City underwater? It happens now. Every time they drop a lot of rain at once, we get a lot of flooding. I'll tell you, when I was the chief of EMS operations, we had a terrible flood. It killed, I believe it, in the end, it killed probably about 30 or 40 people. There were people drowning in their own basements that we had to get divers in to try to, save. So these are things that are not common, happen all of a sudden and create, ridiculous levels of challenges for people who are responding to try to save lives. All right. So I think you understand that piece. That piece is really about prepare yourself, do the work in advance of the issue of the incident, so that you have some kind of guide to get you through from beginning to end. And don't be afraid to talk to other agencies who have had similar experiences and try to get some lessons learned from them. Everybody's more than happy to share the stuff that they learned. So as you're starting to manage these events, technology is changing around us. So as a call taker and as a dispatcher, you should be aware of what the role of technology is. I mean, it's so much better than it was back in the days. Now we have something called computer aided dispatch. That's our CAD system. According to GEMS, it can reduce dispatch time by an average of 30 seconds per call. And that transformed emergency dispatch. Now you think 30 seconds per call, that's something. Well, 30 seconds is a tremendous amount of time when you have, 1 in a million calls, 1.5 million calls per year. 30 seconds is life or death on the other end when it comes to people and oxygen, keeping them alive. So getting an ambulance or getting a first responder to the scene 30 seconds faster can save lives. And it really truly has revolutionized the ability to dispatch resources, which we can only hope that it continues to get better and better, and it really has. And I think it's going to continue to get better and better. But as it continues to get better and better, we rely more heavily on technology. And if technology fails, we really should have a plan for that. So, if everything you do is electronic and you don't know how to do any other thing, then if that goes down, how do we continue to exist? How do we continue to serve those people who need us? So again, that could be part of your pre-planning, is how do we manage if technology goes down? Just so that you have an idea and everybody who is working has an idea. This CAD system really has helped dispatchers and call takers get information very quickly and accurately and be able to dispatch the appropriate resource, and has standardized the approach basically across the nation, right? I mean, I think most people probably have some kind of computer-aided dispatch. I'm sure not everybody in our country does, but it certainly has helped. There's more advances in communications, though. There's, text to 911. That's starting to become something that people are participating in. It allows for access in situations where maybe you can't actually call due to noise, injury, or safety concerns. It's able to translate languages. So, having an ability to text, which is how most of us communicate now. I maybe have a handful of people that will actually call me on the phone. Most people will just text. And I think as a people, we're very comfortable with this. So having this as an option is a great thing for folks. And I remember hearing a story about a woman who was being held captive. It was a domestic violence situation, and she called the dispatcher. She called 911, and she was ordering a pizza. And the dispatcher was so sharp and got the sense that there was something wrong, and she was trying to give her the address, right, to deliver the pizza. And the dispatcher picked up on the tone, picked up on the words, and she was saying, "This is 911, ma'am. This is not a pizza shop." And she's like, "Yes, I know. I would like a pizza with sausage," and the dispatcher picked up on it, got all the pertinent information, and was able to send the resources to that particular location and end up saving this woman. Once the cops got there and was able to get her out, she was safe based on a smart dispatcher who didn't just blow off the call as a prank or somebody, misdialing. So, text messaging is one of those things that can happen when you can't talk. When maybe you're in trouble, you cannot talk, you can text. So that's something that is starting to really kind of grab hold now. We'll see that. There's a next generation 911. That's something that is, I guess the intention is to replace CAD, which, comes with quite an expense. So, I think over the next few years, we're going to start to see this happen more and more. This can receive text messages, images, videos. Dispatchers can get information way quicker than normal and definitely more accurately. If somebody could send a picture to the call taker or a dispatcher as to what's happening, or a video clip as to what's happening, it's certainly going to make things more understandable, right? And quicker to ascertain what kind of resources are needed at this particular assignment. The problem with this is that it's going to cost a lot of money. So I don't see this as being something that's going to roll out super quickly, but I know that in the next few years, we're going to really start to see this. And, videos, again, we all, picture and videos, like 1,000 words, right? Like you get me a video, I can get a lot of information out of a video clip. You might even see some artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is like machine learning and algorithms, and it starts to collect and pick up on patterns. It can help with how to get resources to from one place to another based on previous patterns of traffic and time and things like that. So the more calls that you go on and the more calls that you have and the more that information and data is fed into this AI, it just calculates it and analyzes it and comes up with different types of responses. Predictive analytics are, along the same lines, where during this particular time, during this particular weather, during this particular peak, we need to take this route or go this direction. So there's a lot of that type of stuff that is happening in the wings that are meant to try to increase our ability to respond quicker. Telemedicine is something that, is now starting to be very common, where, people can call, speak to a doctor directly, speak to a healthcare professional directly. We use telemedicine when it comes to some of our units. So when we have telemedicine, dispatchers can connect the patient with medical professionals right there. Some of them may not even have to go to an emergency, room or a hospital. It may save time and resources. So those things are, promising, right? Like we spent a lot of time taking minor illnesses, injuries to emergency rooms that tie up a lot of the resources. So this is a way for them to get immediate contact to a healthcare professional and get whatever treatment that they may need, but not necessarily have to go to a hospital. So maybe they need a prescription or something along those lines. And GIS, this is our mapping program. It allows the dispatch resources quicker. It improves response times. And remember, anytime we're talking about response times, and that's all you ever hear in the EMS system, response times, response times. But anytime we hear about response times, what it really means is that somebody's life is being saved. The quicker we could get a resource to you, the more likely you're going to get the care that you need immediately. Now, when it comes to being on the other end, and you happen to be critical or in cardiac arrest, your brain cells start to die within 4 to 6 minutes. So, every 10 seconds or every 30 seconds or every minute really, really counts when it comes to getting the appropriate resources to that assignment. And, like me, and I'm sure all of you, there are people who you love who, you would want the most immediate, most appropriate care for if they were in their time of need. So, as a dispatcher or call taker, speed is a friend, right? We need to get resources dispatched very quickly. Now, like I said when I started, it's we're all first responders, no matter where you're sitting in the chair, whether you're on out there in an ambulance, out there with a stretcher or sitting behind a dispatch terminal. We are all first responders, and we have made a career out of somebody else's trauma. And what we live every single day is chaos. We do this for many, many years. I mean, I was 31 years in a business, chaos every day. So it is impossible to say that you are not affected by stress. So I want you to think about this, because according to GEMS, up to 20% of emergency call takers and dispatchers experience PTSD due to their work. Now imagine if every phone call you picked up was somebody else's tragedy, was terrible, had terrible details, had it goriness, people dying, people sick, people crying, people upset. This is how you spend your day. You are absolutely exposed to stress. And, that psychological toll can really grab hold of you and create some problems. So, I want you to think about this. Remember that your stress is cumulative, which means that over the time that you're doing it, you're building a little bit more and a little bit more, a little bit more, and putting that all on your shoulders. And just because you had one bad day doesn't mean that you have no stress, because every little day that you have puts a little bit more on your shoulders. It's important that you address these issues, because stress and suicide are up in the emergency response arena. So make sure that if you need the help, you're reaching out to people. If you start to see that you feel emotionally exhausted or you're starting to depersonalize, right? Like everything is like a job. If somebody is calling with the worst possible assignment, they're calling you and you're talking, you're getting that information, and it's just sad and gory, but you don't think anything of it. That could be a sign that, this is starting to take hold, that depersonalization. Or cynicism, where you think everything in the world is bad. And why wouldn't you? You spend 8 to 12 hours a day getting exposed to the worst things that can happen. So why wouldn't you think everything is bad? I'm here to tell you not everything is bad. Just the stuff that we chose to expose ourselves to. There is definitely more good in the world than there is bad. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a very real thing. And, it's important that you deal with it. There are a couple different ways that we could deal with it. There are things that seem a little hokey to some of you. I get it, but they work, right? So short-term practices, deep breathing, visualization of good things, not bad things, positive self-talk. You got this. You could do this. It's going to be okay. This is a short period of time. And then long-term practices like exercise and healthy diet. Emergency response people are the worst when it comes to exercise and healthy diets. We eat on the run. We eat very quickly. So try to increase your ability to enjoy the stuff around you. Right. Develop a social support. Have some friends that are not on the job, right? Maybe some friends that don't do this work, but make sure that there are people, your friends, your family that love you, support you, can listen to the stuff that you feel. Get some hobbies and interests that don't include tragedy, right? And then seek out therapy and counseling. There's nothing wrong with it. Most agencies have some kind of um, access to these particular areas of therapy and counseling for first responders. And there are lots of places that you can go, but the important thing is that you go because, you know, your life is important. And not only your life as a life, but your life as an impact to all the people that are around you, your friends, your families, your coworkers, all those people that call and you answer. Like you are so important to everybody around you. It's important you get the help that you need. Agencies should consider debriefing when there's been a large event. A debrief is something that happens hours or days after the traumatic event, whether it's a mass shooting or a building collapse or a car accident or a train derailment or just a pediatric job or anything that really triggers you. It's structured, it includes a facilitator. It's generally in a group setting where everybody can express their emotions and their feelings. It's important to be able to unload that quickly before it settles in and you have to carry it and it just becomes part of your cumulative stress. And then the mental support end of things, it has to be continuous throughout somebody's career. You can't just ask somebody if they're okay and assume that because they said yes, that that's the truth, right? We already know the level of exposure that people have in this particular type of profession. So make sure that there are lots of different things available as far as mental health care, counseling, therapy, any type of things that are going to help. But that has to be extensive and it has to be available throughout somebody's career. There has to be check-ins, and that could either be as an individual or a group. So I will say, the job that we chose, so very important, so very important. Sometimes it's hard to remember how important it really is because it's not a place where you get thanked a lot, right? Everybody's always in crisis mode and there's not a lot of thanks and greetings. I will tell you that I'm going to thank you on behalf of all those calls that you've taken, all those patients that you've saved, all the family members that have their loved ones with them because you said yes to this type of job. You took on the pressures that most people can't handle. You said, put me in, I'm somebody that can help. I'm going to say thank you. Thank you for being that person. Thank you, because the impact that you have is immeasurable. If you just think of one person that you love in your life, what's the person you love the most in your life? And think about all the people and all the memories and all the things that are going to happen over the next decade or 2 decades to that person, and all the people that are going to love them and have them at their weddings and birthdays and all the other things. The reason they have them is because people like you exist. Because when they are at their worst possible moment, there are people like you who will do their job, who will show up for them, who will be the answer to their problem. So thank you. And please understand how very important you are to this profession. I know that it's not easy. I know that we're going to continue to face tragedy after tragedy, and that we are in this together. And we have to be able to lean on each other to continue to get through this. But don't lose who you are. Don't lose who you are. Don't lose your family. Don't lose the love that you should be experiencing every day. Seek the help that you need and do the job that you signed up for, because it saves lives. I want to thank you all for coming and joining this session today. I sure hope that you got something out of it. And if you didn't, thanks for spending an hour with me. And if you did, I would love it if you could put some key points or key takeaways into the chat, and we can maybe explore a couple of those things together. So I think I'm going to turn it back over to Heather now and ask you if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to answer them best I can.
Great. There are a couple questions. When you were referring to 6,500 calls, were they all medical calls?
They were, yes.
Okay. And then how do they do a debrief after 9/11?
9/11 was not there. I don't remember being part of big debriefs. I remember being brought into a small group environment. I was an EMT back then, and we talked a little bit about what we had gone through, but because the buildings had collapsed in the middle of Manhattan, that did not happen right away. That we just kept working and working. So that, I guess our debrief started to happen a little later in the game, when they would bring therapists down, they would bring people to the scene. And as we were taking breaks, we would have access to them. And we certainly leaned on each other and cried a whole lot. So, we still do, right? It's a long time ago, and it feels like yesterday. But we need to get better at debriefs.
Very good. So there's a kind of a discussion topic. Any thought on pre-planning for incidents like the mass shooting in Maine? Many dispatch centers are less than 20 on staff at a time, and the surge like that could last 6 to 12 hours.
Yeah, and I think that's my point. My point is, as an agency, you have to plan for these things and hope that they never happen. And maybe it means introducing other areas into your system, right? So for example, when we called for mutual aid agreement during COVID, during the pandemic, I actually called for federal resources twice. I had to fold 200 ambulances into my EMS system who did not have the same equipment. So now they're coming from all over the country to help us, and we had to figure out how to dispatch them. We had a dispatcher, an IT person, actually build a mobile CAD system that went into their cell phones that they were issued before they got here, so that we can have GPS location on them and send the assignment directly to their phone. Because remember, these are folks from all over the country. So I would say, look at the areas that are surrounding you and see if there is an opportunity to shift people from other systems into your system to provide a surge. and it almost like a mutual aid agreement, but you would have to spend a little time learning each other's systems. But, certainly worth the effort, because in a small place like Maine, and you have 20 people on duty, that's going to last, 8 to 12, maybe 24, maybe 36 hours. And you're not going to be able to handle that all on your own. So there has to be a reserve fleet, whether that be, the people in the surrounding areas or people within your own agency that are possibly per diem or trained from other areas of your department that are also trained in dispatch. So you have to figure that thing out, because I can guarantee you it's going to be a problem.
Excellent. Those are all the questions we have. So that concludes the webinar. Thank you everyone for your participation and questions. We will be sending out a replay link in the next few days. It will be available for 2 weeks from the time it's sent out. So thank you again for joining us today. A big thank you to Chief Bonsignor, and we hope you enjoyed the webinar and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.